I want to get straight to it about what stress is. The first thing I want to do, we talk about busting stress and beating stress. Stress is not all bad. Stress is not all bad. Stress can activate us. Stress is good. In fact, there's been, we know this for years, is that a certain amount of stress, we become more productive. In fact, with more stress, we become even more productive, of course, until we get to a point. And then it drops actually rather sharply, and we become extremely unproductive. So there are things that we do to stress our children to activate them on purpose. You've got 2 minutes to get down here. You've got 10 seconds to get upstairs, right? You need to get this done now. It's due tomorrow. So we up the stress for them on purpose, and that's not bad. We work, some people, adults even, will say we work better under time pressures, and we get things done. That would give me a deadline, otherwise it won't get done. So not all stress is bad. We do want to use some of it to activate ourselves and our kids to be able to get optimum productivity. But of course, bless you, just like anything else, too much of a good thing, right? It goes in the other direction. We want balance. So we're talking today mostly about when is stress too much stress, how do you recognize that, and then what do you do about it? So let me get straight to how do you recognize that? For our kids, they don't typically have the language to be able to say, you know what, I'm really stressed. I feel like there's a tremendous amount of expectations upon me today, and I'm concerned about my ability to fulfill those expectations. Because that's what a lot of stress is, at least the negative kind of stress is. It's a pressure, it's expectations, it's demands that we perceive on ourselves that we have concerns about being able to fulfill. So, and I'll talk later about expectations because I think that's a very key piece in that. But the way the kids will show it is various, and it can be physical. They can have increased headaches, difficulty sleeping, increased stomach problems. A lot of different physical complaints can be seen as stress. Obviously, get them checked out medically, but they can be exacerbated by stress. We certainly know of a number of health conditions that are affected by stress, and kids are no different. It can show up behaviorally. They might isolate more. Remember, we're talking about elementary kids today primarily, not so much the teenagers. They might isolate more. They might avoid things. They might be avoiding school or even social activities. They might say, I don't really feel like going and playing with my friends. They may be shutting down. Some kids act out, and some kids turn in. So you need to know your own kid and how they respond to stress. They can be emotional responses. They can be moody, irritable, cranky. Again, we're not talking about teens. Mostly our elementary kids. So we want to keep an eye on these things. They may be sensitive, more easily quick to cry or quick to anger. And we have to approach the kids, and if we ask them, are you stressed? That's not going to register too much. So we need to be perceptive for what's going on with them and help them develop a vocabulary for that, especially for our young kids and even some of our other kids. They have difficulty putting words to these things, and it's okay if we model that for them by not only talking about our own stress, and I'll talk about that in the parent section, but also in giving them words like, you sound frustrated. You sound like you might be a bit overwhelmed right now. You sound like you're a little cranky. And it's not so much knock it off, but just practicing labeling. And I'll get to that piece. So there's lots of different ways that our kids can manifest stress, and including dropped grades, dropped friends, increased social difficulties, because if they're stressed with us, they might also be stressed with their friends. But the part I really want to spend most of my time on is, what do you do about it, right? We kind of have an idea what stress is, and we might even have a good idea what it looks like in our kids. The question is, what do you do about it? And I'm not going to talk too much about some of the physical stuff. I think you can address that. We talk about sleep and diet and exercise, and that's all yes. But I'm going to talk primarily about what kids can do physically and cognitively, because I tend to use a type of behavior called cognitive behavioral therapy to address their stress. So physically, stress/anxiety can, not the same thing, but awfully close, can manifest physically. Muscle tension. We don't breathe right when we're stressed. As people literally stop breathing, they hold their breath for longer periods of time. There's all kinds of measurements to look at that. And so we try to do things to get them to release that physical tension. You know, a deep breath is always my favorite because it's portable. It's not it's not magic. It does a little bit, but it does a little bit every time. It works, and it's extremely portable. And we do it all the time. We do it almost intuitively. So at this point, it's almost cliche, but it does work, and it helps to break muscle tension. It helps to get you breathe. It helps to get your heart rate down. It's a quick little helper, not a fixer, a helper. The other piece is cognitive and thinking. Now, I'll tell kids, what do you think when you're under stress? Well, I'm going to fail this test. No one's going to like me. I'm going to mess up when I do a public talk, and everyone will think I'm stupid, and blah, blah, blah. And so we talk about this tendency to get into negative thinking, these automatic negative thoughts. I call them our what-if kids. But what if this happens? And believe me, it's almost never positive. In fact, one of my children is very much a what-if kid, and we note this. In fact, my example I usually tell is we were going to go to Uka in Doylestown for his birthday. It's what he picked. And then I said, where do you want to go? He said, Uka. And I said, great. And then he said, but what if hot oil splashes on me? Because we're going to hibachi. And I went, well, that would burn, and that would not be good. And he kind of knows, because he has the unfortunate pleasure of having me as his father, and his mother's a teacher, so he gets it from both sides. But so I talked to him about what-if thinking over the years, and he's kind of become more aware of it, which is the next part. And to the point where we were golfing a few years ago, playing chip and putt, and he said to me, Dad, what if I shank this shot, but it hits the tree and it bounces up next to the hole? And I said, well, that would be amazing. He said, see, not all my what-if thinking is bad. But to me, that was an example of a kid taking his natural tendency to go what-if negative, being aware of it, and turning it around. He had to turn it around. It didn't get there naturally. He had to turn that around on his own. So what do you do about these what-if kids and the kids who stress? Because when it comes to stress, we talked about this. The Marion Callahan was interviewing me for the newspaper for this talk that we're doing. And she said, what do you say to the people who say, kids, what do they have to be stressed about? And I said, well, some kids have real stressors at home. Maybe they don't know where their next meal's coming from. Maybe they don't know if they're going to be out on the street next week. There are real stressors among some of our kids. But there are also kids who will wig out, stress out over a test grade. My example of this, I have a kid who I see in therapy who said he was stressing out because he thought he might fail a test. And I said, well, what do you think? Have you ever failed a test before? And he said, not recently. I said, oh, so you have failed a test? He went, no, I've never failed a test. But he had to go with not recently because he couldn't let go of the fact that this was a real possibility. So our kids that, even though it may be something what we might see as not a big deal, kids who worry and are more susceptible to stress do two things. And adults for that matter, we tend to overestimate the likelihood of a negative outcome. And we tend to tie a lot of weight to that negative outcome. So this kid who thinks he's going to fail a test thinks it's likely, even though he has no evidence to suggest that that is going to happen. And if he does fail that test, he's going to end up living in a van down by the river. So really bad things will happen. And we try to temper this with reality. We try to say, if it's a thunderstorm, a lightning storm out there, you probably don't want to stand in the middle of a field. Because although the odds are really, really small that you will get struck by lightning, the negative outcome is pretty big. So we try to balance we talk to them about how likely is that, where's the evidence for that, and then is this a big deal or a little deal? So when you work with your kids at home, look for that thinking. Look for what is their automatic negative thought. Where do they go with their worries? No one's going to like me. I'm going to fail this test. And it can be big things and it can be little things. So those are the things you want to address. And the way you address that, now we're getting to what you guys do as parents, is first reflect, validate. I hate to sound too much like a psychologist, but validate the feelings. But what I mean by that is don't necessarily say, well, why don't you just talk to Jenny? I'm sure she'll understand. That's a solution. That's what you should do. Quite frankly, that's what guys tend to do. We tend to give solutions and fix-its. And women are much more, tend to be in tune with what the emotional process is. And for our kids, the first thing we really need to do is like, you really sound frustrated. That's annoying. You sound like that really bothers you. I can see it. You're really upset about this. That's good. You're also giving them the language for how they can express their feelings, which is very, very important for as they get older, because you want them to be able to express it rather than act it out. So we want them to be able to vent it, express it. We want to be able to allow that, because I'm sitting here thinking, there was something happening last weekend, and I was very stressed about something. And I was thinking, oh, you're going to give a talk on this. Do your thing. So I went, no, no, this is really bad. I can't believe something trivial happened to me. And I thought, okay, so there's a real role for the venting. We really try to make sure that is an important part for our kids, that they get a chance to vent. Okay, now that we've vented and we don't snowball down here, we're going to address it mentally and physically. So it's not how do you avoid the stress, it's how do you deal with it when it comes. And we try to tell the kids that you're not going to avoid stress. We're not going to make this never happen. This is going to happen again. So what are your skills? You got to practice these things. You got to get on top of these things and be able to practice them. So I think I've got to be pretty close. Anybody watching the time? Do I have 5? 9 minutes. 9. Excellent. 9? Good. Okay, good, because I want... No. Don't ask again. So good, because the other piece I want to talk about is the parents and our own stress. So I have something I call the airplane rule, which is, you may have heard this before, but the airplane rule is if you're on an airplane, if there happens to be a sudden decrease in cabin pressure, mask will drop from the ceiling. Please put your own mask on before trying to assist someone with you. So, and that applies, the idea is, if you pass out due to the lack of oxygen in the cabin, you're in no shape to help the person who needs it. However, if they happen to pass out, you've got your mask on, you can help them out. And the same thing applies at home. If you are stressed out, if you're overwhelmed and too focused on your own stress and things that are going on, you're not managing it well, it puts you at a compromised position to be able to deal with your children's stress, your loved one's stress, to be able to be a support and a help to them. So it's very important that you practice that airplane rule. Some parents tend to feel that's like, well, I can't do this for me because I have to do this for my children. And yes, that seems to be just about every day. But please make sure you take the time to maintain your personal health, if for no other reason than to model that for your own kids. This is how you take care of yourself. This is how you manage stress. So you want to... If you want to practice healthy coping skills, or more likely, if you want your kids to practice healthy coping skills, then practice them and show them to your kids. So this is important. You also don't want to create a culture in your house that is a stressed culture. In other words, where stress is always expressed, always at the forefront, and it's always, this is what's bothering me, as opposed to, this is how I bring it down. So the ways we bring it down, we can't bring it down and apply those things I've talked about without awareness. If you don't know when you're stressed, and your kids probably don't know when they're stressed, they act like it, they may not be able to put a label on it, they're not going to be able to do the strategies until you know you're stressed. So if I know I'm tired, I know I need a nap. If I know I'm hungry, then I know I need a snack. And actually, the hunger one is something I use with kids about how do you use your awareness to use the skills. For example, if I'm full and I don't need another bite, then I'll use the term anxious instead of stressed here. If I don't have anxiety, there's probably nothing I need to do about it. If I use a scale of 0 to 10, but there's a million different ways of doing that. So if you're pretty low, you're in a target zone, I call it, then you don't have much to do. But if you're getting in a little bit higher, if you're getting a little hungry, you might need a snack or something to tide you over. Or if you know you're going to be hungry, you might want to grab a snack now. Or if you're starving, you need a full meal, big bacon cheeseburger from Mom's or something, then that would satisfy what you need. So similarly, if our kids become aware of where they are on this scale, and I'm not saying it has to be 1 to 10, you can use whatever works for you, but the idea is being aware of where you are with your emotions. So if you're aware that, and the way, I'll just tell you a kid I met with yesterday, I use a thing, by the way, called My Mood Tracker. It's an app. There's an app for that. And there's probably several of them that are fine. That's the one I happen to use. I like it because it's on the phone or whatever, and the kids are surgically attached to them, so they constantly have them, and they can rate their mood throughout the day, and at least twice a day, I say, before you go to bed, at least one other time. So the mood app, My Mood Tracker app is good because you not only select the emotion that you feel, anxious, happy, by the way, not just all the negative stuff, and you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And then you can put a note in. And for those of you who are interested, you can also track your sleep, your medication, your exercise, all kinds of things on there. And you track these, and it will graph it for you over time. And they can email it to me, and I get it in a graphic form, and they can add a little note to it, like I was stressed out because I had a test, and I thought I was going to fail. And they can do those things. And they can bless you. What I see with kids is something I just saw with this kid yesterday, or the other day rather, Thursday, was he starts off rating himself, and they're all 1s and 10s. There's no gray. This is normal. This is it. This is where we are. If you see your kids do this, this is good. That's where we start. I'm hungry or I'm not hungry. I'm stressed or I'm not stressed. And so we try to, this is developmentally appropriate for this age. This is what we're trying to build in, shades of gray. Not that shades of gray. And then we see some 5s. And then eventually we'll see some 7s and 3s and more subtle shades of what they're feeling. And that is awesome. Those kids do well. In fact, some kids I see with a lot of emotional dysregulation learn these skills, and they actually go through adolescence a little easier because they're much more in tune with their emotions. They know where they are. They know what to do about it. They don't get wigged out when they get anxious. They've been there, and they know how to deal with it. So it's a nice tool, and again, it's not that app specifically. It's the task of turning your attention inward, not just towards your hunger, but towards your emotions, being able to accurately label it. That's where you guys come in, giving them words, modeling all that, and then using the tools to be able to reduce that anxiety and that worry and that stress. So even though I realize I have 5 extra, now all of a sudden it went from 8 to 0?
We're about that time.
All right, good. Well, I'm going to stop here and we'll turn it over to Pam. This is now where we leave the floor open to you to ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer them.
I think sleep is so I'm, as a general pediatrician, that's something I usually bring up at well visits. I go backwards, so starting with a toddler needs between 12 and 14 hours of sleep a night. An elementary school child, like I guess all we have in here, need more along the lines of 10 to 12 hours, and teens need somewhere between 8 and 10. And I will tell you that I don't think most kids, especially once they get to the teenage years, are getting good sleep. I think that some of the things that I tell kids to do to promote healthy sleep habits are to find a relaxing thing to do in the evening before bedtime, shutting off from the remote and electronic world, because I think that flashing screen in front of you, whether it's on a phone, whether it's on the computer, and even the television, is all counterproductive to getting good, healthy sleep. So there's also some things that parents should be looking up. I like to leave parents and say, go look up and find some things that work for you. I tell them to go research sleep hygiene. It actually helps the parents as well as the kids to find out what you're doing wrong to get yourself a good night's sleep. And there's a lot of great information on the internet out there about sleep hygiene.
I think that is very much sort of the information that Dr. Stone was talking about, is that he has some kind of irrational thought or belief about what's going to happen if it's not perfect. So, I mean, that's what I hear in that, is that he has to first discover that it's irrational, and then why, or what he's afraid of. There's a fear. I would think there's a fear sort of driving the compulsion for it to need to be perfect. So
Having children do everyday tasks is a really important thing that we don't do in our modern culture. Like I think a lot of times we don't let the kids do the chores because we want them done. And I'm not in no way being accusatory towards you. I'm guilty of some of this myself. We want them done in a perfect way. So we don't let them do it, and they don't learn to do it. And one of the other things that happens is that in our modern world, which is a very virtual world where you can go to the internet or the television and you can see that perfect life, they don't get the idea that there's little variations. Something so simple as you're chopping up, vegetables for a salad, and you're not going to chop them perfectly. And if you're doing them together, they'll begin to understand that it's okay that mom doesn't do it perfectly, I'm not going to either. Folding the laundry, doing simple everyday tasks, I think, with them, and then when you're doing them, point those little imperfections out and say, but it's okay. That's all right that it works out that way. This is how life is sometimes, so that they see that that's a pattern that happens again and again.
I think it also has a lot to do with the language that the adults use with kids who are like that. Most of the time, what I've found in school is that the most anxious children are the ones who are perfectionists. And oftentimes it's their own perception of what failing is. And one thing you can do, and talking to school is perfect as a start, but usually kids will take direction from teachers much more easily than they will from home. And one thing that I've been talking to our teachers about not saying is, as long as you did your best, as long as you did your best. So every day I have to do my best, because as I walk out of work at night, there are many days it wasn't my best day. So I think the language is very important. Like Dr. Mass said, those everyday activities that you can do that don't have to be perfect. But also, some of our teachers have done mandatory breaks. You have to go to recess. You can't stay in. They'll take the assignment away and say, we're going to stop here. Take a deep breath. Go do your thing. Be a kid. It's fun. So it's about the conversation and the language that we use, and to try to stay away from those superlatives, because that's when you get the 10s and the 1s. I'm either horrible or I'm the best ever. So somewhere to have them find some balance. And when there are times that he does have balance that might not be related to the music, really point that out so he becomes aware.
And speaking to this, one last point on this, is speaking of the balance, part of me loves the fact that he wants to get it right, that he's so driven that he's going to be good, right? So, but balance. So there are kids who we try to push a little harder. Could you please practice the piano today? And then there are kids who are asking to get off the piano because that's enough. So, but it's about balance. And so I wouldn't want him to, I applaud his drive. I love that. But balance, being able to get everything else done and do things that he wants to do. Because left to his own, like when he's on his own as an adult, he might say, I'm clearing my weekend, I'm playing piano all day long. And that may be something he likes to do, but we need to have balance. So it's not
train his brain
Right.
how to handle that. I can speak to that. One thing that I've tried to do in the school setting is have the kids own the anxiety. So that means it may be a discussion with your class that I would help you facilitate, where you share with your classmates. I'm in and out of class. Right now I'm working with Mrs. Ram because I get really anxious about being in the classroom, because I know that parents are very concerned about what the other children will think, but that is part of the problem. We've heard lots of really scary things in the news, and it's because there's this stigma that people don't want to talk about it. It is mental health. If somebody came to you and said, your child's sugars are not balanced. We believe he may have diabetes. Here's the plan of action. No one would hesitate. We do a rating scale as well. I use 0 to 10. I said, so your problem is how big? Is it this big? Is it a 10? Because if it's a 10, that would be the school was on fire. I'd get us out of here. So you don't have to worry about that. I don't think it's a 10. So I think open and honest communication with the teacher. He or she is always your first line of information from the classroom. Parents tend to call me first just by nature of my title, but I don't always have the best information from the classroom. That's really the teacher. And then once the teacher knows, I usually jump in there and we establish some accommodations.
So I'll speak to the tics at least. I see kids who have tics, and they are certainly worsened with stress, fatigue, other things. I will let you know the most common treatment of tics is nothing. And I'll see plenty of kids who come in with tics who are not stressed at all. They develop tics. I see a lot of kids who have transient tic disorder, 8, 9, maybe 10 years old.
Eye blinking with them?
All kinds of things.
Okay.
And a lot of these are treated, they go away after a few years.
Okay.
I'll see a lot of parents that will recognize them as tics and they'll say, Johnny, stop licking your lips. Stop doing, he does this thing. So one of the things that and then he stops eventually. So not always, but. So the thing I hear most out of that is a anxious child who has since developed tics that has done a wonderful job in terms of becoming more aware, and the symptoms that were going on at night have significantly gone down.
Yes.
And she's verbal about it. She's making choices about swim team. She feels in control of her decisions. I like where you're going with this in terms of the support that you're getting. Definitely check out the GI. All that stuff I really like.
We see a lot of that systemic. It sort of ends up. I do think that kids ultimately want to please their parents, their teachers, and their coaches, which can be a double-edged good and bad. She might not want to go to swim team practice, but I'm supposed to go to swim team practice. So I always, think it's important too to look for congruence in what they're saying and how they're behaving or how they look, that their feelings and their words are matching. And the empowerment for the choices about the activities that they do. And I also think going back to the whole airplane model, looking at our family system and how we operate, and the pressures that we may not know they get from us. And I can tell you as an athlete, I walk with my girlfriend Melissa every Sunday night, and I would say to her, I don't understand why my son is so stressed. I tell him all the time, it doesn't matter, have fun. Do your best. I like to see you play your sport. I'm competitive. I would be on the computer after my races. Oh, I could take 2 minutes out of that transition 1 and I would have been in first place, not third. Talking about myself. So he's watching me self-criticize myself and then seeing me go, oh, honey, just go have fun and be coachable. She's like, have you met yourself? You're very competitive. He sees that from you. And I'm like, oh, no more computer when they're awake. I'll look at my scores when they're sleeping. But so that whole systemic, issue with anxiety, that sometimes in our homes we support the symptom with our own expectations on ourselves, even though we say to them, it's fine to just do your best. I agree with you. I am not a fan of the statement, do your best. Most of us come home on most days and go, we really didn't do our best, with patients and with our friends and our jobs and whatever. Quick little tools I love for your what if kids is what's the other side of that coin. And I love the visual. I have kids that carry a coin in their pocket. If it's always a bad outcome, what's the other side of the coin? What could the potential good outcome be if you took that risk, if you tried that? And I have kids that really like that. They'll put their hand in their pocket in school and be like, okay, I could get an F or I could get a B. You know, that's the other side of the coin. And I love the empowerment. What are 3 things you can do right now that are in your control, in your grasp, that are going to help you sort of feel better in this moment? And I feel like kids like that too. They feel empowered by that. So.
And you did start by, one of your questions in your discussion was, is this what you see with anxiety? And I would say absolutely yes. Like in a primary care pediatric setting, when a child comes in and I hear that they've had abdominal pain and they've been missing school, that's one of my red flags in the back of my mind. I need to make sure that it's nothing organic, nothing physical, but then when I'm done, I'm wondering, is it anxiety that's underlying the abdominal pain? And, make sure that the child knows that if you get to that point, I know you still feel the pain. Mm-hmm. So it may have started with constipation, but once you clear that up, if the pain is still there, validate that. I know this still hurts. That's okay. But, I think it's hurting because of the anxiety. When you're anxious, hormonal changes are happening. Changes happen in your gut too. There's hormones in your gut, and that's what causes the problem. So when we fix this other problem, that belly pain is going to get better too. And I think having a very positive thought process for the physical components is really helpful to the child. This is going to get better. They need to hear that. So.
Just most recently, our staff development day, which I believe was February something, school nurses, psychologists, and counselors, we all worked together, as well as it was secondary special ed teachers were also at this workshop. And a couple of our school psychologists, along with a school nurse, did a whole in-service for us about anxiety. They taught us the physiological changes that our bodies go through when we experience stress. Talked about what Dr. Stone talked about. Stress is good and we need it for motivation, but when it tips and falls very quickly, that's when you see that anxious kid in front of you. So then what we do is we take that information back to our faculties and have discussions at faculty meetings, and we talk about it often. I know in the secondary schools, in some of the schools, they are working on some mindfulness and just taking the time at the front end of class to calm their bodies and have a sense of themselves. So we haven't started that in elementary school just yet, but what we start with often, depending on a grade level schedule, is they have class meeting. So in those class meetings, that's your talk time. And you have that talk time with the teachers. And just by nature of their experience in the classroom, sometimes issues come up, social issues. Elementary counselors give lessons in classrooms. Lots of character education, but also stress and anxiety come up all the time. So there are those little teachable moments throughout our school day and school year. And then those more formalized approaches, so class meetings, guidance lessons, and in-service within our schools.
And as a district, Central Bucks is looking at trying to implement more stress reduction and anxiety reduction among the students. So I serve on the District Wellness Council, and at the beginning of this year, Dale Scaforo, who's in charge of the Wellness Council, asked us each to send in, what are 3 things that you think we should be talking about that impact wellness in our schools? And so, I give back my little quippy reply. Number 1, anxiety. Number 2, anxiety. And number 3, anxiety. Because I see a lot of stressed out kids out there. So when we had our first district meeting, and unfortunately they only happen every 3 or 4 months, we did have people come in and they're starting to look at, especially in elementary and middle schools, giving kids some stress reduction techniques that they can practice.
I say that the difference for me between anxiety and an anxiety disorder is when it gets in the way. So if it's getting in the way of what she wants to do and how if she's comfortable, then it needs to be addressed. But there's a continuum of anxiety amongst us all. So some people are just more anxious. And, I know people who are afraid of getting on the plane because they're afraid it's going to crash. But the intellectual side of them takes over and says, that's a fear, but I also know the odds. The odds are very unlikely that it'll crash. I know once my wife and I were in line for a roller coaster at an amusement park, and she was a little nervous about it. And she saw these 12-year-old kids get out of the cart ahead of us and said, well, I guess if they're not flying out, I guess I'm not going to fly out either. So we try to, you go in, and there are times in our lives when we're anxious. And it's not an issue of not being anxious, is when it comes up, can you manage it? So if she's prone to be anxious thinking, and she can manage it, that's great. But if it starts to get in the way, then I think you need to do something about it.